No one in the small town of Herzburg, Lower Saxony, could have imagined that behind the walls of the Schneider family home, one of the most shocking tragedies in recent German criminal history would unfold. What began as a normal working day in March 2023 would end in a scene of horror that would shake the entire community. Stefan Schneider, 42, was known to everyone as a man of respect. A former police officer with 15 years of exemplary service, he had retired early due to a back injury sustained during a high-risk operation. His colleagues described him as meticulous, disciplined, and extremely dedicated to his work. Stefan was the kind of cop you wanted by your side in difficult situations, recalled Jonas Müller, his former partner. He never lost his cool. He always thought before he acted. Stefan's wife, Clara Schneider, 38, was a music teacher at the local elementary school. With her neatly styled blonde hair and constant smile, Clara was loved by the children and respected by the parents. She organized the church choir every Sunday and was actively involved in community activities. Clara had contagious energy, said school principal Petrok. The children loved her lessons because she made everything fun and special. The couple met 16 years ago during a music festival in Hanover. Stefan was off duty enjoying the day with friends when he heard Clara's voice singing on a small stage. He used to say it was love at first sight. 3 years later, in an intimate ceremony surrounded only by close family and friends, they were married in the historic St. Maria Church in Herzburg. During the first years of their marriage, the couple seemed truly happy. They lived in a cozy house on Bergstrasse, a quiet, tree-lined street where children played freely on summer afternoons. The house had a well-kept garden that Clara loved to decorate with seasonal flowers. Stefan built a small wooden deck in the back with his own hands, where the couple used to have breakfast on Sundays. But not everything was as perfect as it seemed. Those who knew the couple more intimately began to notice subtle changes over the past 2 years. Stefan had become progressively more withdrawn after his forced retirement. The transition from a career that defined his identity to a domestic routine had been more difficult than he publicly admitted. He tried to hide it, but you could see that Stefan was lost without his badge, noted Florian Weber, a neighbor and longtime friend. A man who spent 15 years solving problems and protecting people suddenly found himself without a purpose. That weighs on the soul. Stefan began spending hours in the basement, which he had converted into a small workshop. There, surrounded by tools and unfinished carpentry projects, he sought some kind of meaning. Clara encouraged his hobbies, but friends noticed that she seemed increasingly distant, as if she were carrying an invisible weight. Clara's sister, Sabine Hoffmann, 35, was a constant presence in the couple's life. Divorced for 3 years and childless, Sabine had moved to Herzburg to be closer to her sister after her difficult separation from her husband. She worked as a freelance graphic designer, which allowed for flexible hours and frequent visits to the Schneider home. Sabine and Clara have always been very close, said their mother Helga Hoffmann. Since they were little, they were inseparable. When Sabine's marriage ended, it was natural that she wanted to be close to her sister. Clara was her safe haven. Sabine was the opposite of Clara in many ways. While Clara was reserved and traditional, Sabine was outgoing and modern. She had short brown hair cut in an asymmetrical style, wore colorful clothes, and was always trying out new hobbies. In recent months, she had become practically part of the furniture at the Schneider house, showing up several times a week, sometimes staying late into the night. Stefan initially seemed to enjoy Sabine's company. She brought a different energy to the house, lively conversations about art, culture, and world events that he no longer had through his police work. But some neighbors began to comment on the frequency of the visits. It was strange, admitted the next-door neighbor, Emma Richter, discreetly. Sabine was there almost every day. Sometimes I would see her car still parked in front of the house late at night, even though I knew Stefan had to get up early for his physical therapy. What no one on the quiet street in Herzburg could have imagined was that behind the flowery curtains and well-tended garden, the family dynamics were about to implode in a way no one could have predicted. The public smiles hid secrets that, once revealed, would not only destroy a family but shake the entire community. On March 15, 2023, Stefan woke up at 6:00 in the morning as usual. Clara was already in the kitchen making coffee, a morning ritual they had maintained for years. They exchanged few words, a routine that had become normal in recent months. Gone were the lively conversations of the past, replaced by a polite and distant coexistence. "I'll be back early today," Stefan said as he grabbed his keys. "My physical therapy appointment has been rescheduled for 2 in the afternoon." Clara just nodded, focused on her cup of coffee. Stefan noticed that she seemed nervous but attributed it to work stress. The school was preparing a big end-of-term recital, and Clara was in charge of all the musical coordination. What Stefan didn't know was that this day would change everything. The next few hours would reveal truths that would destroy the image he had of his life, his marriage, and his own identity. His reaction to these revelations would transform him from a protector of the law to its most tragic violator. As Stefan left his house on that cold March morning, with fog still covering the streets of Herzburg, he had no idea that he was living the last hours of his life as a free man. By the end of that day, 2 people would be dead, and he would be handcuffed in the back seat of a police car. Not as a colleague, but as a suspect. The tragedy was just beginning. The morning of March 15th began like any other for Stefan Schneider. After leaving home at 6:30 a.m., he headed to his physical therapy session at the Herzburg Clinic, located 20 minutes from Herzburg. The route was familiar, one he had traveled 3 times a week for the past 18 months, ever since a spinal injury forced him to leave the police force. Stefan's physical therapist, Katharina Vogel, noticed something different about him that morning. He was quieter than usual, she would later recall in her testimony. Normally Stefan would talk about sports, politics, anything, but that day he barely spoke, only responding in monosyllables. I asked if everything was okay, and he said he was just tired. The session ended at 8:15 a.m. Stefan had the rest of the day off until his next appointment at 2 p.m. He decided to stop by Becker Schmidt, his favorite bakery, for a coffee and a pretzel. It was a comforting routine, a little ritual that gave some structure to his empty days since retirement. "He stayed here for almost an hour," said the bakery owner, Thomas Schmidt. "He read the newspaper, had 2 coffees. He seemed pensive, distant. When he left, it was almost 9:30 a.m. Stefan then made what would later be described as the mistake that changed everything. He decided to go home early. His next appointment had been canceled by phone while he was at the bakery. The clinic called to say that the doctor was sick. Instead of finding something to do or letting Clara know he would be back early, Stefan simply got in his car and drove home. If he had called, if he had given any warning, maybe none of this would have happened. Jonas Muller, his former partner in the police, would later reflect. But Stefan was the kind of man who didn't see the need to report his every move. He was going to his own home. Why would he need to warn anyone? It was exactly 10:12 a.m. when Stefan parked his gray Volkswagen Golf in the driveway. He immediately noticed Sabine's car, a red Opel Corsa, parked in front of the house. This was not unusual. Sabine visited Clara often. But something about the scene made Stefan pause. The curtains in the living room were closed in the middle of the morning on a weekday. Clara always kept the house brightly lit, saying that natural light was important for her mood. And there was loud music playing, which was also unusual. He could hear it even from outside. Stefan felt a knot in his stomach. His police training had taught him to trust his instincts. And at that moment something was wrong. He took the keys out of his pocket but hesitated. Part of him wanted to ring the doorbell, announce his presence, but another part, the analytical, investigative part, wanted to understand what was going on before revealing his arrival. He opened the front door quietly. The house was strangely warm, the heating on full blast despite the moderate temperature outside. The music was coming from upstairs, from the couple's bedroom. Stefan recognized the playlist Clara used to play when she was relaxing, soft jazz and bossa nova songs. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step carefully chosen to avoid the creaks he knew by heart. His heart was racing, adrenaline beginning to rush through his veins. He didn't know what he expected to find, but his police instincts screamed that something was deeply wrong. The bedroom door was ajar. Stefan stopped in the hallway just 2 meters away. That's when he heard it. Voices, low laughter, sounds that made his blood run cold. Sounds he recognized instantly, viscerally. With one swift movement, Stefan pushed the door wide open. The scene that unfolded before him was like a punch in the stomach. In the bed he and Clara had shared for 13 years, his wife was with his sister-in-law Sabine. There was no mistaking what was happening. There was no innocence possible in the intimacy he was witnessing. "Stefan!" Clara screamed, pulling the sheet up in a panic. Time seemed to stand still. Stefan stood frozen in the doorway, his brain struggling to process what his eyes were seeing. 15 years as a police officer had prepared him to confront criminals, life-threatening situations and brutal crime scenes. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for this. Sabine was the first to recover from the shock. "Stefan, I can explain." "Explain?" His voice came out as a low, dangerous growl. "Explain what exactly?" Clara began to cry, still clutching the sheet against her body. "Please let me talk. How long?" Stefan asked, his voice now eerily calm. The calm before the storm that any police officer would recognize as the most dangerous moment. "How long has this been going on in my house, in my bed?" The silence that followed was more eloquent than any answer. Clara couldn't look at him, tears streaming down her face. Sabine had turned completely pale, apparently realizing for the first time the gravity of the situation. "Months," Clara finally whispered. "It started 6 months ago. 6 months. Half a year." Stefan did the math in his head, going over every visit from Sabine, every time Clara had seemed distant, every night she had said she was too tired. All the pieces now fit together in a painful and clear puzzle. 6 months, he repeated, as if testing the words. 6 months of lies. 6 months of treating me like an idiot. "It's not like that," Sabine began. "Shut up." Stefan exploded, his voice reverberating off the walls. "You have no right to speak. You, whom I welcomed into my home, into my family. You who cried on my shoulder when your marriage ended, and all the while you were—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The anger was so intense that he could physically feel it like fire running through his veins. His hands trembled, clenched into fists so tight that his fingernails dug into his palms. Clara got up from the bed, wrapped in the sheet, trying to get closer. "Stefan, please, we need to talk. Let me explain how this happened." "How this happened?" Stefan laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "It didn't happen, Clara. You chose it. Every day for 6 months, you chose to betray me, to lie to me, to make a fool of me. What happened in the next few minutes would be debated exhaustively during the trial, analyzed by psychologists and experts in human behavior. But at that moment, in that overheated room in Herzburg, 3 people were caught up in a tragedy that was just beginning to unfold." Stefan turned abruptly and left the room, stomping down the stairs. Clara followed him, still wrapped in the sheet, begging, "Stefan, wait. Please don't leave like this. We need to talk." But Stefan wasn't leaving. He was going to the basement, to his workshop, to where he kept something that would turn marital betrayal into criminal tragedy. In the history of Little Herzburg, that would be remembered as the moment when everything changed irreversibly. The moment when an ordinary man, trained to protect and serve, crossed a line from which there would be no return. The basement of the Schneider house was Stefan's sanctuary. After leaving the police force, he had transformed that damp, dark space into a complete workshop. Wooden benches lined the walls, tools were meticulously organized, and unfinished carpentry projects were scattered in every corner. It was there that he tried to find some purpose after losing his identity as a police officer. But there was something else in that basement, something Stefan had never mentioned to Clara. At the back of the workshop, hidden behind a tool rack, there was a small safe built into the wall. Even after retiring, Stefan had kept his service weapon, a Heckler & Koch P30, the standard pistol of the German police. Technically, he should have returned the weapon, but a favor from his former commander allowed him to keep it, legally registered as personal property. For protection, he had justified at the time. You never know when you might need it. Now, his hands still trembling with rage, Stefan typed in the safe's code, 6 digits representing the date of his marriage to Clara, 060407. The irony did not go unnoticed, even in his altered emotional state. Upstairs, Clara had quickly thrown on a nightgown and was coming down the stairs calling out to him, Stefan, please come back here. We need to talk like adults." Sabine had also gotten dressed and was in the bedroom frantically searching for her cell phone. Her hands were shaking so much that she dropped the phone twice before she could hold it. She knew she had to get out of that house immediately. She had seen that look on Stefan's face, a cold, calculating, dangerous look, the look of a man who had crossed some internal boundary. "Clara, we have to leave now," she called urgently. "I can't just leave," Clara replied, her voice breaking. He's my husband, my home. We need to work this out. You didn't see the way he looked at us, Sabine insisted, following her sister down the stairs. I know that look. My ex had the same look before. Clara, please! We need to leave. In the basement, Stefan held the gun. The weight was familiar, comforting in a disturbing way. 15 years of training, thousands of hours at the shooting range, countless situations where this gun had been his companion. He checked the magazine, a full 15 bullets. What was he thinking at that moment? Forensic psychologists would debate this extensively during the trial. Some would argue that it was a premeditated, cold, calculated act. Others would say it was an extreme emotional reaction, a psychological breakdown of a man who had lost everything that defined his identity. Stefan climbed the stairs from the basement slowly, the gun in his right hand along his leg. He entered the kitchen where Clara was waiting for him, still trying to find words to explain the inexplicable. Stefan, please put that away, Clara said when she saw the gun, her voice rising an octave in panic. You don't need that. We're civilized people. We can talk. Talk? Stefan interrupted, his voice frighteningly calm. What exactly do you want to talk about, Clara? How you destroyed our marriage? How you cheated on me with your own sister? How many times you laughed at me while I was up there fixing the roof or in the basement making furniture for our house? We never laughed at you, Clara began to cry. I never meant to hurt you. It just happened. I didn't plan it. Sabine and I, we just connected in a way I didn't expect. You connected, Stefan repeated as if tasting the words. In my bed? In my house. While I was in physical therapy because I wrecked my back protecting people like you. Sabine appeared in the kitchen doorway, stopping abruptly when she saw the gun. Stefan, she said carefully as if speaking to a wild animal. This isn't going to solve anything. Please let us go. You never have to see us again. We can just what? Stefan turned to her, his eyes cold and empty. Just pretend this never happened? Just go on with your lives? Do you think that's how it works? Sabine's phone started ringing in her pocket. She didn't even move to answer it. Later, investigators would discover that it was her mother, Helga, calling to arrange lunch. If she had answered it, if someone had interrupted that moment, perhaps the tragedy could have been avoided. I gave everything for you, Stefan continued, looking at Clara. 15 years of marriage. I worked overtime so you could follow your dream of teaching. I supported you when your mother was sick. I built an entire life around you. And you threw it all away for what? For an affair with your sister. It's not an affair, Clara shouted back, her sadness momentarily turning to defensive anger. I love her, Stefan. I know you can't understand, but it's true. And I loved you too. I still care about you. But what I feel for Sabine is different. The word love was like a trigger. Stefan raised his gun, pointing it at Clara. His years of police training made the movement fluid, automatic. Don't say that word. You don't know what love is. Love is loyalty. Love is respect. Love is not destroying the person who trusts you. Stefan, put the gun down, Sabine pleaded, stepping forward. Please, this isn't you. You're a police officer. You protect people. I was a police officer, Stefan corrected, the gun still pointed at Clara. Now I'm nothing. No badge, no purpose, and now no family. You took the last thing I had left. What happened in the next few seconds was described differently by experts and investigators. The landline phone in the kitchen started ringing. They later found out it was Clara's school, asking about her absence. The sudden shrill sound made Clara take a step back, tripping over one of the kitchen chairs. Stefan interpreted the movement as an attempt to escape. His police training, years of conditioned reactions in high-stress situations, took over. When you point a gun at someone and that person moves abruptly, you react. The first shot echoed through the house like thunder. Clara fell to the floor, her hands instinctively going to her chest where the bullet had pierced her. Blood began to trickle between her fingers as she looked at Stefan with an expression of absolute shock and disbelief. No, she whispered. Stefan, no! Sabine screamed, a primal sound of terror and despair. She rushed to her sister, falling to her knees beside Clara, her hands trying to staunch the bleeding. Clara, stay with me. Someone help. Stefan stood still, the gun still in his hand, staring at the scene as if he were watching from outside his own body. Part of him, the part that had been a police officer who had sworn an oath to protect lives, screamed in horror at what he had just done. But another part, the part dominated by pain and anger, saw only the realization of a twisted justice. Sabine looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "Call an ambulance, Stefan. For God's sake, she's going to die. Call an ambulance now!" But Stefan didn't move. He just looked at the two sisters, one dying, the other desperate, and something inside him snapped completely. The line separating civilization from chaos, law from crime, protection from destruction, he had crossed that line with a single shot, and now there was no turning back. "You've destroyed everything," he said, his voice flat and distant. "Everything." And then he raised the gun again. Time seemed to die in that moment. Sabine, kneeling beside her dying sister, looked up and saw Stefan pointing the gun directly at her. The black barrel of the Heckler & Koch P-30 seemed immense, a tunnel leading to nothingness. "Stefan, no," she begged, her hand still pressing against Clara's wound, now soaked with blood. "Please think about what you're doing. This won't bring anything back. It will only destroy your life, too." "My life is already destroyed," Stefan replied, his voice frighteningly calm. The emotional storm that had erupted moments before had given way to a mechanical coldness that was even more terrifying. "You made sure of that." Clara coughed up blood, trying to speak. "Sabine," she managed to whisper. "Run," but Sabine didn't run. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was love for her sister. Maybe it was simply the paralysis of absolute terror. She stayed there, vulnerable and exposed, staring at the man she had helped betray. "I'm sorry," Sabine said, tears mixing with the blood on her hands. "Stefan, I'm sorry for everything. I never wanted it to happen like this. I never wanted to hurt you. Please let me call an ambulance. Clara needs help. She can still survive if we act now." For a moment, a brief, fragile moment, something seemed to flicker in Stefan's eyes. The mention of the possibility of salvation, of undoing at least some of the horror he had started. His hand trembled slightly, the gun dropping a few inches. Then Clara groaned in pain, a low, agonizing sound. And with that sound, something in Stefan solidified. He saw not the woman he had loved for 13 years, but the embodiment of his betrayal. He saw not his sister-in-law pleading for her sister's life, but the other half of the duo that had humiliated him. "You had your chance," he said. "You had months to tell me the truth, to have some decency, some respect, but you chose to lie. You chose to make a fool of me in my own home." "We were wrong," Sabine cried, her voice breaking in despair. "We were terribly wrong, I know, but that doesn't justify murder. Stefan, you're better than that. You've spent your whole life upholding the law, protecting people, and for what?" Stefan almost laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "To come home and find out that the people I trusted most were betraying me. To find out that all my sacrifice, all my work, all my love meant nothing." Sabine's phone began to ring again in her pocket, the shrill sound echoing through the blood-stained kitchen. It was her mother again, insistent. Helga Hoffman would later say she had a terrible feeling, a mother's intuition that something was deeply wrong. "Answer it," Stefan ordered suddenly. "Answer the phone." Sabine hesitated, confused. Her hands were covered in blood. "What?" I said. "Answer it." Stefan shouted, the gun steady again. "I want you to talk to your mother. I want you to tell her what you did. I want her to know what kind of daughters she raised." With trembling hands, Sabine took the phone out of her pocket, smearing blood on the screen. She stared at the flashing name. "Mama." Tears streamed down her face as she answered. "Hi, Mama," she said, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "Sabine, honey, are you okay?" "You sound strange," Helga's worried voice echoed through the phone. Sabine looked at Stefan, pleading. He gestured with the gun. "Go on. Mama, I need to tell you something," Sabine began to sob. "Clara and I, what happened?" "Where's Clara?" "Sabine, you're scaring me." "Clara's here, Mama, she's—" Sabine looked at her sister, who was now pale, her breathing shallow and irregular. "She's hurt very badly." "Hurt? How, Sabine? What's going on?" Stefan snatched the phone from Sabine's hand. "Helga," he said, his voice cold and controlled. "Your daughters destroyed my family and now they're going to pay for it." Stefan, what are you saying? What happened to Clara?" "Stefan, please." He hung up the phone and threw it on the floor, crushing it with his foot. The gesture was so violent, so final, that Sabine understood. There would be no more talking, no more pleading. Stefan had made his decision. "Please," she tried one last time, her voice just a whisper. "If you're going to kill me, at least call an ambulance for Clara first. She doesn't have to die like this, in pain. Please, Stefan, if you ever loved me as family, do this for her." Stefan looked at Clara. She was unconscious now, her small, fragile body lying on the cold kitchen floor. Blood had formed a pool around her, staining the ceramic tiles he had installed himself 3 years ago. He remembered the day Clara had chosen that specific pattern, saying it made the kitchen more cheerful. For a second, just a second, Stefan Schneider became human again. He saw the woman he had loved, the woman he had dreamed of growing old with. He saw Sunday mornings drinking coffee on the deck he had built, the laughter, the plans, the shared dreams. But then he remembered the bedroom, the scene he had witnessed, the betrayal that burned like acid in his soul, and his humanity was gone again. No, he said simply. The second shot was different from the first. The first had been almost reflexive, a trained reaction to a sudden movement, but the second was deliberate. Stefan carefully aimed, took aim, and pulled the trigger with the same precision he had learned in thousands of hours of police training. Sabine didn't even have time to scream. The bullet hit her in the chest, piercing her heart. She fell backward, her eyes wide with shock, and collapsed next to her sister. Her hands, still covered in Clara's blood, automatically reached out toward her, as if even in death she was trying to protect her. The silence that followed was absolute. Stefan stood still, the gun still in his hand, staring at the two women lying on the floor of his kitchen. Smoke was still coming out of the barrel of the gun. The smell of burnt gunpowder filled the air, mixing with the metallic smell of blood. Outside, life went on as normal on the quiet Bergstrasse. Children played a few houses away. A mailman passed by delivering letters. No one had heard the shots. The Schneider house was well soundproofed, a feature Stefan had considered an advantage when they bought it. Stefan slowly lowered the gun. He looked at his hands, the same hands that had held Clara when she cried over her father's death. The same hands that had built furniture for their home. The same hands that had sworn to protect and serve. Now they were the hands of a murderer. Clara let out one last weak sigh, her body finally succumbing to her injuries. Stefan heard that sound. The sound of life leaving the body of the woman he had loved, and felt nothing. The emotional void was complete, as if he had burned all his emotions in a single devastating fire. He walked over to the kitchen table and sat down quietly in one of the chairs. He placed the gun on the table next to the morning newspaper that was still open to the sports page. The normality of that detail, the newspaper, the table, the kitchen that seemed so ordinary except for the two dead women on the floor, was surreal. Stefan picked up his cell phone and with surprisingly steady fingers dialed a number he knew by heart. The number for the central police station in Herzburg, where he had worked for 15 years. "Polizei, how can I help you?" answered a female voice he recognized. "Petra, the receptionist." "Petra," Stefan said calmly. "It's Stefan Schneider. I need to report a homicide. 2 homicides, actually." There was a confused pause. "Stefan, are you joking?" "I'm not joking, Petra. I'm at my house, Bergstrasse 47. I just killed my wife, Clara, and my sister-in-law, Sabine. I need you to send a team." The line was silent for a moment, only the sound of shocked breathing. Then, "Stefan, are you serious? Is this real?" "It's real," he confirmed, his voice devoid of emotion. "I'm unarmed now. The gun is on the table. I'll wait here for the team to arrive. I won't resist." And then, for the first time since he had pulled the trigger, Stefan Schneider began to cry. Stefan's call to the Herzburg police station caused instant panic. Petra, the receptionist, immediately transferred the call to Commander Ralph Brandt, who had been Stefan's direct superior for more than 10 years. What followed was one of the most surreal conversations of Brandt's career. "Stefan, it's me, Ralph," the commander said, trying to keep his voice calm and controlled. "I need you to explain to me exactly what happened, slowly, in detail." On the other end of the line, Stefan sounded strangely composed. "I came home early today. I found my wife Clara with her sister Sabine in my bed. They had been having an affair for 6 months. I lost control. I took my service weapon and shot them both. They're both dead." Ralph Brandt closed his eyes, feeling the weight of those words. Stefan Schneider, one of the most reliable police officers he had ever commanded, was now confessing to a double homicide. "Stefan, are you hurt? Is there anyone else in the house?" "No, just me and the bodies. I'm sitting in the kitchen. The gun is on the table. I won't resist when you arrive." Well, that's good, Stefan. Keep the gun away from you. Don't touch anything else. The team is on its way now. I need you to stay on the phone with me until they arrive. Okay. No, Stefan said softly. I can't. I need to be alone with this for a few minutes. And he hung up. Ralph immediately dispatched all available units. In a small town like Herzburg, where violent crime was rare, the news spread quickly through the police station. Jonas Mueller, Stefan's former partner, was in the locker room when he heard. He dropped the coffee cup he was holding, the hot liquid spilling onto the floor. No, he muttered. It can't be true. Not Stefan. But it was true. 6 minutes after Stefan's call, 3 police cars arrived at Bergstrasse 47, sirens cutting through the morning silence. Neighbors came out of their houses confused and alarmed. Emma Richter, the next-door neighbor, watched the scene with growing horror. I thought it was a robbery or something, she would later testify. But then I saw Stefan coming out of the house with his hands up, calm as if he were going to work. Only there was blood on his shirt, a lot of blood. The protocol for situations involving former police officers was different. The response team was highly trained and extremely cautious. The commander of the operation, Dominic Wagner, used a megaphone. Stefan Schneider, come out of the house with your hands visible above your head. Slowly, the front door opened. Stefan emerged, his hands raised, his eyes empty. He was wearing the same clothes he had worn that morning, dark jeans and a blue shirt, but now they were stained with blood. He moved with mechanical precision, following each command without hesitation. On your knees, hands behind your head. Cross your ankles. Stefan obeyed each instruction. 2 police officers approached cautiously, handcuffing him with professional efficiency. One of them was Tobias Keller, who had trained under Stefan's supervision. His hands trembled as he tightened the handcuffs. I'm sorry, Stefan, Tobias murmured almost without meaning to. Don't apologize, Stefan replied, his voice distant. You're just doing your job. I would do the same. As they led Stefan to the police car, the forensic team entered the house. What they found confirmed every word of Stefan's confession. Clara Schneider was on the kitchen floor, a single gunshot wound to her chest. Death had been relatively quick, according to the medical examiner who arrived 15 minutes later. Sabine Hoffman was next to her, also with a gunshot wound to the chest. Death was instantaneous. The scene was meticulously preserved. Stefan, with his police training, had not touched anything after the shots were fired. The gun was exactly where he said it would be, on the kitchen table. 2 spent cartridges were found, 1 near each victim. The forensic photographer, a young man named Lucas Schneider, no relation to Stefan, had to leave the house twice to get some fresh air. It was so ordinary, he would say later. A normal kitchen, cheerful even, with flowered curtains and refrigerator magnets, except for the 2 dead women on the floor. The normality made it all the more disturbing. In the police car on the way to the station, Stefan stared out the window without really seeing anything. Jonas Miller had insisted on being one of the officers escorting his former partner. He sat next to Stefan in the back seat, fighting back tears. Why, Stefan? Jonas finally asked. Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you talk to me before you did this? Stefan turned to look at him, and Jonas recoiled slightly when he saw his eyes. They were completely empty, as if the person he had known had left the body behind. And what would you have done, Jonas? Would you have changed the fact that my wife betrayed me? That my life was a lie? That everything I built was fake? I would have helped you process it differently. I would have stopped you from throwing your life away. They betrayed you, yes, but now you're a murderer. Is that how you want to be remembered? Stefan gave a bitter smile. I had nothing left, Jonas. My career was over because of my back. My marriage ended because of her betrayal. What did I have left? To be remembered as the cuckolded idiot or the man who took justice into his own hands? That's not justice, Jonas said firmly. It's murder. You know that better than anyone. I know, Stefan agreed calmly. And I'll pay for it. But at least now they've paid too. On Bergstrasse, the news spread like wildfire. Helga Hoffman arrived half an hour later, having driven at breakneck speed from her home in Göttingen after Sabine's strange phone call. A police officer had to physically restrain her from entering the house when she saw the police tape. "My daughters, my girls! Let me see my girls!" she screamed, trying to push past. It was Ralph Brandt who had to break the official news. Held the distraught woman's hands and said the words no parent should ever have to hear. "I'm sorry. Clara and Sabine are dead. They were killed by Stefan Schneider." Helga's howl of grief echoed down the entire street. Neighbors watching from a distance began to cry too, even though they didn't know the family well. It was the kind of pain that transcended words, that touched something primitive and universal in everyone who witnessed it. The small town of Herzburg had never seen anything like it. Violent crimes were rare, and when they did happen, they usually involved strangers, drugs, outside conflicts, but this was different. This was family. This was one of their own. A former police officer. A respected man who had crossed the most fundamental line of civilization. In the afternoon, when Stefan was formally booked at the police station, he cooperated fully. He provided his complete statement without requesting a lawyer present. He described every detail with clinical precision: how he discovered the betrayal, how he retrieved the gun, how he shot each woman. "Do you regret it?" asked the assigned investigator, Felix Hoffmann, ironically sharing the surname of one of the victims. Stefan thought for a long moment. "I regret that it came to this, but I don't regret that they paid for destroying me." That answer would seal his legal fate. Stefan Schneider's trial began 6 months later, in September 2023, at the Göttingen Regional Court. The case had attracted intense national attention. A former police officer who killed his wife and sister-in-law after discovering a lesbian affair. The German media covered every detail, debating issues of honor, betrayal, domestic violence, and homophobia. Stefan pleaded guilty to both murders from the outset. His lawyer, Christian Vogel, tried to argue mitigating circumstances: extreme emotional stress, severe provocation, temporary psychological breakdown. But the prosecution, led by the relentless Katharina Schmidt, accepted none of this. This was not a crime of momentary passion, she argued in the crowded courtroom. Stefan Schneider went down to the basement, opened a safe, took his gun, came back, and executed 2 unarmed women. He had multiple opportunities to stop, to reconsider, to simply leave the house. He chose violence. The hearings were devastating. Helga Hoffman testified, barely able to speak through her tears. "He destroyed my family. He took my 2 daughters. They made mistakes, yes, but they didn't deserve to die. No one deserves to die over a relationship." Jonas Müller also testified, torn between loyalty to his former partner and horror at the crime. Stefan was a good cop, a good man, but on that day he let anger destroy everything he was. And now 2 women are dead, and he'll spend the rest of his life in prison. The defense presented psychologists who diagnosed Stefan with severe, untreated depression, aggravated by a loss of identity after leaving the police force. They argued that he had suffered an acute dissociative episode, a temporary break from reality. But Stefan, when he was finally allowed to speak, destroyed his own defense. "I knew exactly what I was doing," he told the court, his voice firm and clear. "I wasn't crazy. I wasn't dissociated. I was betrayed, humiliated, destroyed, and I wanted them to pay for it. It was a conscious choice." The silence that followed was absolute. His own lawyer closed his eyes in defeat. The prosecutor smiled discreetly. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. Guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. No mitigating circumstances. The sentence was read on October 3, 2023. Life imprisonment with the possibility of parole only after 25 years. Stefan received the sentence without visible emotion. He was 42 years old. If he served the minimum sentence, he would be 67 when he could be released. Helga Hoffman collapsed into the arms of family members when the sentence was announced. For her, no amount of years would bring her daughters back. No amount of justice would be enough. In the months that followed, the case continued to generate debate. LGBTQ+ rights groups used it as an example of homophobic violence within relationships. Police associations debated mental health and psychological support for retired officers. Domestic violence experts pointed out the warning signs that had been ignored. The house at Bergstrasse 47 was sold for a fraction of its market value. No one wanted to live in the house of horror, as the media labeled it. It was eventually bought by investors who demolished it completely and built a small community park on the site. Stefan was transferred to the maximum security prison in Chile. Reports indicate that he has become a model prisoner, calm, cooperative, keeping to himself. He refuses all media interviews and has cut off contact with all former friends and colleagues. Jonas Müller visited him once 2 years after the trial. It was like talking to a ghost, he described afterward. The Stefan I knew no longer exists. There is only this empty shell that breathes and eats and sleeps but does not really live. The victim's mother, Helga, never fully recovered. She moved to a smaller house, unable to bear the memories. She set up a foundation in her daughter's names that supports victims of domestic violence and provides resources for the LGBTQ+ community. I can't bring Clara and Sabine back, she said in a rare interview in 2024. But I can try to ensure that other families don't suffer as mine has suffered. May other LGBTQ+ couples not be afraid to live their truths. The case of Stefan Schneider remains one of the most shocking in recent German criminal history, not because of the brutality of the crime, as there have been far worse cases, but because of what it represents, how ordinary people, even those trained to protect, can cross unimaginable lines when confronted with betrayal and loss of identity. Forensic psychologists study the case as an example of how multiple stressors, career loss, identity crisis, marital betrayal, can converge into explosive violence. Police trainers use it as a case study on the importance of mental health and support systems for officers. And in Herzburg, the small town where it all happened, the case is still remembered in whispers. Parents warn their children about the dangers of uncontrolled anger. Couples in trouble seek therapy earlier, and everyone remembers that behind any facade of normality, a tragedy may be lurking, waiting to explode. Stefan Schneider, the former police officer who swore to protect lives, went from protector to destroyer. 3 lives ended that day in March. 2 physically, 1 in every sense that matters. And an entire community learned that the line between civilization and barbarism is much thinner than anyone would like to believe.